If you want to have that cream cheese frosting cupcake with your best friend sitting on, at the best bakery downtown, like, eat the cupcake, enjoy the cupcake, but just that's your cupcake for the week, just moderation and self-love is really what it's all about. Don't starve yourself. Don't, overfeed yourself foods that are supposed to be good for you. Just kind of sit back and really listen to what your body is telling you.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Subbo.
Greetings, everyone. Ashton Subbo here with the Savannah Podcast. I'm here with my guest, Britt Barret. She is a wellness counselor, Ayurvedic chef, and the creator of Daily Ayurveda. Today's topic is all about Ayurveda. We're going to talk about Ayurvedic life hacks for optimal living and get a general idea and sense of what Ayurveda is, what it can mean to you, and how you can use it into your life to live more optimally. Britt, welcome on the show. It's nice to have you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So for people that really aren't familiar with Ayurveda, like what is Ayurveda? How can you sort of explain it in a very simplified way for people that have never heard of it before or have only heard the name?
Okay, yeah. So the word Ayurveda, it's a Sanskrit word, and it literally translates into life wisdom. And Ayurveda is a 5,000-year-old system of medicine that originated in India. And it's really the sister science to yoga. So it's more of the diet and lifestyle aspects of yoga. It's how to really live your life in balance using nature as your guide, and how to not just survive, but really to thrive and live to your optimal potential.
Awesome. What originally inspired you to study Ayurveda or get involved with Ayurveda?
I had always been, my dad was he was actually an allopathic physician. And so I grew up with Western medicine and kind of had dabbled into was curious about alternative medicine, but I really didn't start researching any forms of alternative medicine until I actually came down with a pretty gnarly digestive disease when I was graduating college in 2005, and ended up went to the doctor and had a colonoscopy and ended up being diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is a chronic digestive disease that basically it's an autoimmune disease where your body eats holes in itself, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I was very, very sick and actually just sort of researching all different forms of alternative medicine. And when I stumbled into Ayurveda through attending a lecture at a bookshop randomly one night, I realized that it was a complete system. So it wasn't just take this herb and you'll feel better, or stop eating this and you'll feel better. But it was looking at your mind, your body, your spirit, your lifestyle, everything.
In the work that you do, like, what would you say is the most common condition or the most common things that you come across with your clients and with students and people that you're working with?
A lot of different reasons, actually. So some people come with digestive disorders. Other people come just because they want to know what their dosha is or what their basic constitution is, and I can get into that a little bit more later. So people who are relatively healthy, but they just want to know what foods are going to be best for their body type. And then I have clients with MS. I have clients who are trying to lose weight, pre-diabetic, pretty much all across the board.
Is there anything that you see culturally that you're working with that is sort of epidemic? Like, I mean, from my experience, I know that a lot of people do seem to have digestive issues going on. our culture, I mean, outside the realm of things like yoga, we don't encourage a lot of feeling in the body. And so a lot of times when you get people doing a practice that gets them to feel more, they're like, oh my gosh, I have a lot of abdominal discomfort, and they're living with it all the time, but they've kind of just turned it off quite a bit. I mean, are there things like that you notice that you see very common throughout, regardless of perhaps specifically why people are coming to see you?
Yes, I definitely 100%. Everything that you just said is pretty much, you hit the nail on the head. I think people are largely disconnected from their bodies, and we don't really have we're a relatively new country, and so we have sort of, our diet consists of multiple different cultures and traditions and backgrounds sort of into this melding pot of what tastes good, and we're not actually using all of this beautiful knowledge that we humans have sort of developed over the years of what should we be eating in certain seasons, and what's nature actually providing during different times of the year, and what spices are going to be medicinal for what different types of ailments. And so we're sort of, it's almost like going back to our witchy roots, basically. And yeah, I think that it's become an epidemic, this disconnection with the body, and then also an addiction to food, and not using food as medicine as it should be, but really kind of having this weird relationship with food, where it becomes like this sort of guilty pleasure versus, oh God, okay, I guess I'll eat my greens because that's what I'm supposed to do.
As a parent, one of the things that kind of always blows my mind is the idea of rewarding your child with junk food. It's like, oh, you've been good, you can have a piece of candy. It's like, why would you reward your child? I mean, I with the child, I get that they like candy, but it's like you're giving something that is not healthy for them as a reward. To me, that always seemed crazy. It's like, yay, you did great, here's a carrot. That to me makes more sense, because it's like, oh, you've done something well, let's honor that and celebrate that with something good for the body instead of something that's going to harm your body. Another thing, and I'm not sure, where perhaps in the conversation Ayurveda, or if Ayurveda touches on this, but you touched on it a little bit in your conversation. We live in a really interesting time where, unlike any other time in human history, not only, especially in our culture, do we have access to a lot of different cultural foods, but we have access to things well out of season. So you have people eating fruit in the wintertime. You have all these sorts of things where, like, we have stuff where it's not being grown in season where we're at, and then we import it from somewhere else, which gets into a whole other side of, use of fossil fuels and all this to transport, which is a different conversation. But as well, I see a lot of allergies happening in people because they're not eating foods in season, and that's a common thing. I don't know, where in the conversation that comes up in Ayurveda, but
yes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're asking such great questions. And yeah, that's a huge part of why we have developed so many allergies, is we're not listening to nature. So right now we're entering into springtime. And if you look around us, what's happening is, the snow is sort of melting off the mountaintops, and all of this sort of earth and water heavy energy that has accumulated over the winter time of eating a little bit heavier foods and maybe like hibernating a little bit more. It's the natural time for that to sort of come out of our bodies. So the way that we want to make that happen is to eat more bitter and astringent and a little bit more pungent foods to help sort of clear and cleanse the system. So what's actually coming out of the earth right now, if you look around, especially, I mean, I'm in Muir Beach right now and looking over the hills, and it's just lush green. My garden is just bursting with mint and greens, and this is the time to eat those cleansing foods, and to really make sure we're sort of eating less in quantity than we were in winter as well. And that will really help prevent those seasonal allergies. And we have sort of a different view of allergies in the Ayurvedic world. They're looked at as imbalances. Okay, so pollen is the enemy. Well, the pollen is doing something to you, but if you didn't have that excess kapha, or earth and water in your system from eating fruits in winter that really probably shouldn't have been eating, or overeating, etc. We can get more into that later. Then you wouldn't have that histamine response.
People being educated more on foods, you'd mentioned earlier as well, and it's something that one of my teachers used to always say, like, food is medicine. Most people don't tend to think of food as medicine, but it's medicine that you're taking a few times a day, every single day of your life. It's a really big deal because the quality of the types of foods that you bring in is really going to impact your health. And I think that that's something that's very much missing, at least from American culture. People in the United States, like, we're just not educated on not only the types, we get a little bit into like, okay, well, this generally is a healthy food and this is not a healthy food, but we don't get a lot of education to like, well, when do we eat these types of foods, or how do we combine these foods? And I think that it's something that's slowly coming in more and more as people are, as one end of the food chain is getting worse and worse and worse with fast foods and stuff, other people are wanting to educate themselves more because we are getting so many health problems related to food. If you could get your clients or your students to either stop doing one thing or to all do one thing, so either stop it or start something, what would that be?
I would say stop overeating, really. I mean, I think that is, even people who are health conscious and they're eating healthy food, they're just eating beyond their capacity of what they can handle. And what happens is, if you think about our digestive system, you can imagine that we have something that's called an Agni, or digestive fire. And you can imagine like a campfire burning. Imagine there's like a campfire in your stomach. And you always want to keep that campfire burning at a consistent rate. So what this means is, let's say you're out at a campfire and you find a bunch of wet logs and you just throw the wet logs on top of the fire. You're going to douse out that fire. So it's knowing what kind of wood to feed the fire and how much to feed it. What happens is when you fill your stomach too much, it doesn't actually have the space that it needs to do the work that it needs to do in order to properly digest your food. And when you don't have that adequate fire or the adequate room for the fire to do its work, then we kind of end up with these like half-baked cookies floating around in our bloodstream, which is also known as or toxicity in Sanskrit. Really, I'd say top two things when you eat: fill your stomach with half food, a quarter water, and preferably warm or room temperature water, and then leave a quarter empty space. And a really good way to figure out what portion size is right for your type or for your body is to hold both of your hands out in front of you like you just gathered water from a well. And imagine that you have food filling up your hands. That's about the amount of food that you should eat in one. Are
we doing just the palm, or are we including fingers?
We're like imagining you're imagining that like you just scooped up a bunch of popcorn and how it kind of might round over the top. That's about how much.
Nice.
So for each person, it's going to be different. If you're a tiny person, you're going to need less food, and if you're a larger person, you'll need more. And also keeping in mind how hungry you are. If you're not very hungry, either don't eat and wait till you're hungry, or just eat a really small amount.
Those are sort of some contrasting things living in Asia for so many years. When I came back to the United States, it was like, it's always mind-blowing of how large our portion sizes are here. Like, you get there and just everything's always overflowing the plate here in the United States, but like, you're traveling all over Asia and you get these little portions and you're still always satiated, you feel good, but you weren't overwhelmed with food all the time. And it's so clear whenever I'd come back to the States to recognize that. So, I mean, that gives us an idea of quantity of food. What are some really general kind of tips or hacks that the vast majority of people could benefit from, that would help? Again, those give some ideas of quantity-wise with food, but are there, you also mentioned things like the bitters and more pungent foods. What are some things that people can be doing without knowing specifically what their their constitution is, let's say, that could help with their overall health, with digestion, some basic things to help their overall lifestyle or to help them live a little bit more optimally?
Good question. So a couple things come to mind. First is we really should be eating fruit separately from our meal. And a lot of people kind of eat fruit with their meal because they want to get their fruit into their diet. But what we don't realize is that fruit actually digests quicker than other foods. So if you eat it at the same time, oftentimes people might get bloated or get a stomach ache and they may not know why. And a lot of times fruit is actually the culprit there. And when you eat fruit by itself, then it digests really well. And it actually digests quicker than other foods because it's so sweet and easy to digest. So you want to eat your fruit like at least 20 minutes before your meal so it has time to digest a little bit, or have it as a snack instead. And then I would say don't drink cold water when you eat. Actually, try not to drink cold water ever, especially in this winter and spring months. You can drink cool water in the summertime, but that ice just really it's pretty taxing for the system, and especially when you're eating. I like to always tell people, imagine that you have two tanks, and one tank is full of ice water, and the other tank is full of hot water. And now imagine dropping a slice of pizza into both of those tanks. The one with the cold water, it's just going to coagulate and it's not going to move. And the hot water will at least help to start, kind of melting the food and helping the process along. So one more thing I would say is we're, especially in this, in people who are probably listening to this podcast are going to be, already interested in health and probably already doing some things that they have heard are beneficial for them. And one myth I'd kind of like to bust is this sort of raw kale juice situation that's happening, which is like raw green kale juice is good for everyone. And we have to just remember, just like anything else, every food can be a medicine or a poison depending on who's taking it, how much they're taking, what season they're having it in, what the state of their digestion is. And so just try and, look up Ayurveda and see what type you might be, and really don't just take what everyone says as this sort of one-size-fits-all program, because it doesn't work like that. Each person works differently, and really I'd say checking in with your body and taking note of how you feel after you eat or drink something is the best indication of, knowing whether that it will be beneficial for you or not.
Do you have any resources that you'd suggest, like a website or a book that for someone that is looking to get a little bit more understanding of this or try to figure out their constitution, their dosha? Do you have anything like that you send people to regularly or that you recommend?
There is a book by Vasant Lad, Vasant Lad, Vasant Lad, Ayurveda, A Practical Guide to Self-Healing. And it's a very thin, small book, and it basically gives you all of the basics that you would need to know. But I would also say do some research, but be careful about what websites you're looking at, because Ayurveda is not regulated in the U.S. yet, not legalized. There's a lot of people who take like a 2-month course and call themselves a practitioner, and they could actually end up causing more harm than good if they don't know what they're doing. So it's hard to know your constitution just by reading a quiz or taking a quiz online or reading something. I would recommend seeing someone who has been practicing Ayurveda and really knows what they're talking about, because it's really important actually that you don't blindly start doing things without knowing if it's going to be beneficial for you or not. Oh, and then one other book I would say, there's a book called Eat, Taste, Heal. That's a cookbook that has some great recipes in it. So for people just wanting to sort of explore some seasonal recipes and learn more about what qualities different foods have, that's a great one. Very visual.
So I have a question. Now, I'm a pretty fiery guy. I like hot foods. So like I like my spices, I like my garlic, and I'm already pretty hot and fiery. From an Ayurvedic perspective, like, am I just screwed? Like, do I have to give up those things, or are there things that then I could sort of balance with that, so I can still enjoy the hotter, spicier foods, or what? Like, what does Ayurveda say to someone like myself who's already running hot, but we usually gravitate towards the things that we're similar to? So most people that are running hot tend to gravitate towards the hot stuff. I mean, do I have to go cold turkey? Do I just eat more cooling foods? Like, what, from Ayurvedic perspective, without, really knowing, I guess to get more specific, you'd have to know constitution, all that sort of stuff. But, what are some general ideas? Like, am I going to have to give up all the stuff that I like to be balanced, or can I find a middle range? Some diets, which, without even getting the conversation of actual like diets instead of lifestyles, but like, oh, you have to go cold turkey against this, you can only eat that. Is it that strict in Ayurveda, or does it depend, or what's kind of the view on all that?
Yeah, good question. So it's funny. Some people who run hot crave hot, and some who run hot crave cool, and it's across the board in that sense. So here are the things to really consider. First of all, did you grow up eating spicy food?
No.
So this is, if you did, I would say it would be a little bit more okay for you to have spicy food, because there's a concept known as satmya, which means that it's sort of in your bloodline, or that your body is sort of more accustomed to eating more spicy food. But I am not a believer in doing anything in excess and creating balance, right? So if you absolutely love spicy food, let's not cut spicy food out entirely, because then you're going to have one day where you just say, I just need something spicy and just go to town. Yeah. So it's really knowing more about, maybe we shouldn't have the chili powder, but we could have this instead. Or maybe instead of having spicy food for every meal, let's just cut it down by half, just to start and see how that really affects you. And also keeping in mind the season. So if it's summertime and it's blazing hot outside, and you've been in the sun all day drinking tequila, let's just say.
Totally, because that's how I spend my afternoons.
Right. You're just raging on the river, just eating hot chips and salsa. That's the time when you don't want to eat spicy food, and you actually don't want to drink during those super hot, dry days. But having a glass of wine or a stew that's a little bit spicier in the winter time can be really beneficial. So yeah, I'd say, like, if you are having heat-related issues, then you can't just, eat an avocado and a cucumber and say, oh, well, it balances out, the chili relleno I had. But you can incorporate more of the avocado and the greens and the things that are more cooling, and just lessen the spicy without getting rid of it entirely.
All right, well, that's encouraging. So I don't have to give up all the spicy stuff that I like. So I'm
and the thing is that it's really important to have all 6 tastes in, no matter what your constitution is. So even if, spicy food is not your best friend, it's important to have things with a little bit of that pungent quality, even if it's black pepper or mustard seeds or cumin seeds, just so that you get a little bit of that taste.
You mentioned alcohol as well. Where does that kind of fall in the conversation of Ayurveda? I mean, obviously in India, generally speaking, alcohol is kind of taboo and frowned upon. Definitely not in Western cultures. Where does that fit into one's diet? Is that something that is generally considered like you want to avoid? Or, I mean, again, we're not getting into the absolute side of things, but is it like, are there reasons why somebody would drink more alcohol or less, or what's the Ayurvedic opinion on that?
Like I was saying before, everything can be a medicine or a poison depending on everything, depending on the season, the quality of what you're drinking, who's having it. And if you take a shot of tequila, for example, that's like I don't know why tequila's on the menu. I hate tequila, but anyways, I'm just thinking of like the most hot, intense kind of alcohol that there is. Then it's going to be pretty, like, no matter what your constitution is, no matter what the season, it's going to hit you pretty hard, and it's going to be kind of harsh. And it's more of the poison variety than, sipping a glass of red wine in the winter next to a fire, with your meal. So it's kind of like, and there's a whole section in the Ayurvedic textbooks about medicinal wines and using alcohol as sort of a conduit for medicine, because it does have that quality of sort of cutting and piercing and sort of opening, right? So making like a tincture, for example, like some certain herbs need that alcohol. Because I've been working with people for, 5 or 6 years now, and I see that it's very unlikely that someone's going to cut out alcohol from their diet completely. They might do it for a couple months, but then most people, it's just in their, social situations, and it's a cultural norm, and it's, you go to a work party. And if you're having a serious health condition, I would say definitely avoid alcohol until we get it figured out and we get you back to being in a healthy place again. But if you're relatively healthy and you're not overdoing it, having a drink every once in a while, it's not going to be the end of the world. Just this binge drinking and even the mentality that goes along with sort of drinking to get drunk is what really messes people up.
Well, do you have any last tips or thoughts or comments for listeners out there that want to know more about their bodies, want to know more about Ayurveda, more about living to their fullest in life, especially in regards to their diet? Any last words or things you'd like to say about that?
I would say enjoy life and trust your gut above all else. And this means to watch what you're eating and try and be curious and be, ask your body what it wants, and, learn a little bit about Ayurveda if you're interested in it. And also, I think a lot of people, they just go full bore and they're like 100%, I'm going to eat dal and rice or khichdi every day. And I went through that phase when I was in school. And it's just, I think part of the purpose of life is to be able to enjoy food and enjoy living, and to keep in mind what's best for you and to follow what's best 80-90% of the time. And then if you want to have that cream cheese frosting cupcake with your best friend sitting on, at the best bakery downtown, like, eat the cupcake, enjoy the cupcake, but just that's your cupcake for the week, just moderation and self-love is really what it's all about. Don't starve yourself. Don't, overfeed yourself foods that are supposed to be good for you. Just kind of sit back and really listen to what your body is telling you.
Awesome. Well, I think across the board, that's good advice for people to start listening to their bodies more. Where can we find out more about you and what you're doing? Yeah. I know that you got your podcast starting as well. You've got a website, you have your coaching, you do all kinds of different stuff. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so my website is Daily Ayurveda, and I have some information on there, just basics about Ayurveda. And then I also have a bunch of blog posts and some videos and recipes. You can also sign up for a consultation if you're interested in doing one-on-one coaching with me. And then also, I'm actually going to be sort of rebranding. So I don't know when this podcast will come out, but sometime in the next 6 months, I have I'm going to be changing my name to Cured by the Kitchen, because I just feel like that's a little bit more accessible for people who don't know about Ayurveda to be able to resonate with, these principles and to kind of spread my wings a little more. But yeah, you can email me at britt@dailyayurveda.com if you have any questions. I'd love to I offer free 20-minute consultation. So if anyone's interested, I'm happy to just chat with you and hear what's going on in your world.
Awesome. Well, you might get flooded with things after offering, like, oh, we'll give it free. But that's awesome. So, and what we can do too is we can put both of the website links in the show notes, so that way, if someone's listening to this months down the road, that they know that they can switch over to the was it Cured by the Kitchen?
Cured by the Kitchen, but it's not up yet. So
we'll have the notes for both, for the Daily Ayurveda and the other.
Okay.
Well,
Great.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your passion and your knowledge of Ayurveda with us, and best of luck with all the stuff that you're doing. And we'll stay in touch. Maybe we can get you on the show again sometime. Get some more awesome Ayurvedic tips.
Thank you. You're an amazing interviewer, by the way.
Thank you. The first few weren't so great, so I've had to study up and work on it. But I'm glad that I'm going in the right direction. So thank you. Again, that was Britt Barret from Daily Ayurveda. I'm Ashton Subbo. This is the Savannah Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening today, and I hope you will tune in next time. Namaste. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show today. Please go over to iTunes, write a review, let us know what you think. It helps us in creating new content for all of you. It also helps new listeners get a sense of what to expect from the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.